Okay, this is the second experimental original text reading class. So, last week I thought went pretty well, so that suggests that this week will be a complete and utter disaster. But, you know, carry on. All right, so what I've given you is a fairly recent translation of an original text that we dealt with before, the Theaetetus, and this time I'm giving you, had you read a section near the end of the dialogue. And that's what we're going to do for the first half of this class. We're going to study this. And then in the second half of the class, we're going to look at the most famous idea ever to come out of the Theaetetus, or at least to be based on the Theaetetus. And one question I will ask you, is this idea that we consider after the break, is that really based on the Theaetetus? Because quite frankly, I can't find it in there. I find a bunch of stuff in there that's kind of related to the issue, but it never really seems to me that the sort of clear and simple argument, this clear and simple definition of knowledge that we're going to deal with after the break is really unambiguously the product of the Theaetetus, which is good because I think that definition of knowledge is completely wrong. I think it's a dumb definition of knowledge. It doesn't tell us, it tells us what people think knowledge is, right? It's how we tend to think about knowledge. And when I first heard this idea, of course, I said, of course that's what knowledge is. But another graduate student asked me a question about it, and I went, oh. I can't remember the question, but it quite floored me at the time, and I realized that the idea was that I was really in love with it at that time, really liked that idea. I realized it was wrong. And I'll try and explain why I think that idea is wrong after the break. But first, we're going to look at people talking about this, trying to come up with an idea, and not really doing very well. Now, to put this in context, the Theaetetus contains the earliest known discussion of the nature of knowledge. As far as we know, as far as documentary evidence goes, these are the first people ever to be recorded to be talking about the nature of knowledge. So if they have a hard time with it, that's not surprising. And if you look at it and say, well, of course we know what knowledge is, they're so stupid because they don't know this. Remember, you live in a culture that's basically called Western culture, which is kind of, you know, it's just a name. It's not really any more Western than any other part of the earth. But it's called Western culture for historical reasons. And that culture is at least partially formed on the basis of texts like the Theaetetus and the studies that were made of these texts afterwards. You live in a society where the overall culture, particularly the academic side of it, where all the education, a great deal of the education, is based on study of what they call the classics, which includes the Theaetetus, the Greek and Roman authors. And for a long time, in fact, one of the things that was wrong with Western civilization was that it thought that the ancient Greek and Roman authors were pretty much the only authors worth listening to. You guys are familiar with the term dead white males? It used to be if you went to, it's good actually, but if you went to university, all the writers you would study would be dead, they'd be white, and they'd be male. The DWMs, the dead white males. And that's a term of criticism. Nowadays, it's different. We use authors from all over the place. However, if you count Greek as white, and you know a lot of them were blonde at this time, then this is a dead white male, Plato, his representation of Socrates. Okay, Is this making sense so far? Good. Enjoy it while you can. Because, I'm gonna. Are there any questions before I go into the weird stuff? All right. So, the problem that Theaetetus and Socrates are struggling with is a definition of knowledge. Now, one thing you have to understand about this, apart from the fact that these are ancient Greeks who nobody has ever studied philosophy before, nobody's ever thought about knowledge before, they're probably also drunk. The ancient Greeks drank a lot of wine and they couldn't really hold their liquor. There's a famous dialogue called the Symposium. You heard this word, symposium? How many of you ever attended a symposium? Well, did they serve wine? Because they should, because symposium means drinking party. This is a symposium is an event in which people get together to drink wine. So you can be pretty sure that most of the people in that dialogue were at least a little tipsy.
So is it only wine, or could it be any type of alcohol?
Back then they did not have a lot of choices. Right? Absinthe was something far in the future. Scotch whiskey had not been invented. They probably knew beer, because beer is older than wine. Sumerians drank beer through straws, because it wasn't filtered. There was all the stuff sitting on the thing. There's a seal from ancient Sumer depicting bald guys with long beards in kilts made of sheepskin, with the wool still on, sitting around this big amphora, drinking beer through straws. But the Greeks probably wouldn't have liked beer. It's hard to grow over there, and you can get good wine. You can get okay wine in Greece. Okay. Was there a question?
I was thinking of something, but no, go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. So, one of the things I actually really like about the Theaetetus is it demonstrates a thinking process. Mostly it's Socrates thinking. You could see really Socrates is thinking out loud, and he's saying stuff to Theaetetus to see how he thinks about it himself. Most of the Socratic dialogues, many of the Socratic dialogues at least, are pretty unbalanced. It's Socrates doing most of the talking, and the other guy saying, yes, Socrates. Oh, I think so, Socrates. Yes, you're right, Socrates. Well, I guess so, Socrates. Oh, screw you, Socrates. But there is this thinking process demonstrated in the dialogue. And if you ever want to write your papers in the form of a dialogue, where you have one guy, you're one person saying the other thing, and someone else making an objection, and they're all each of them is talking about what the other says, you can do that. But it's actually easier to just write a paper. Dialogues are actually hard. All right.
Oh, I know what I was thinking of. In the dialogue that he's having, the back and forth that he has with Theaetetus, he seems to agree and then disagree in the following consistently.
Yeah.
He agrees to disagree consistently. And
how many of us found that in the agree and disagree? It's this, it's this, but it's not. It's this and this and this, but it's not. If you were Theaetetus, at what point in the dialogue would you want to punch Socrates? And that's not an essay topic, but it is an interesting question. I think I could probably get through most of that got through most of that conversation without strangling him. But there at the end, when he just turns everything upside down again, I think I would have leapt across the table and at least clocked him one, or thrown something at him.
It almost seemed like he was not trying to arrive at a definition of knowledge because he would never agree.
Well,
he would agree to disagree
right.
with Theaetetus.
He's, remember, this is a very early dialogue. It's the first discussion of knowledge, and knowledge turns out to be a difficult topic. And what Socrates is trying to do is to be not satisfied with anything less than an absolutely correct answer. So they are trying for a provably correct answer. Socrates doesn't want to get an answer that's just makes you feel good, or which they can tell other people and pretend they know something. He wants the actual right answer. And very few people really want the correct answer. They want an answer that feels good to them, or makes them out to know something. And so what Socrates does in the dialogue is he says, well, what about this? And then he thinks about it and thinks, that's not going to work. And then the next thing is, well, what about this? This is it, isn't it? Theaetetus says, yes, it is. And then Socrates, you know what? I don't think that's going to work. And he explains, he tries to explain why. So I'm going to try and go over some of these mental gymnastics, right? And at the end of this, you'll understand why philosophy really doesn't proceed by these kind of dialogues anymore, because it's really frustrating and it gets tedious after a while. We would start to say to people, look, don't tell me your entire thinking process. When you actually come up with something you think works, write that down and explain why it works. So as far as this, when you're writing your papers, think about this dialogue process, the whole Theaetetus. I'm expecting you to have, before you turn your papers in, to have gone through an entire thinking process like this. To have gone back and forth on this and this and this, back and forth on this and this, and then end up with whatever you end up. And to demonstrate that you've gone through a thinking process where you've criticized your own ideas or the ideas of others. Right, so demonstrate a thinking process. This doesn't come to a thesis, doesn't come to a conclusion, but it's still intellectually very valuable. It's an important piece of early philosophy, and we build on this. We work with this, and it represents some kind of progress in philosophy. So he's trying for a provably correct answer, and the method is I have a pen that will write. The method think something with an S up, see if it works. Now, one of the important things about rational thought is that it is discursive. By that, I mean that if someone is thinking rationally about something, they will find themselves going off on tangents. Have you ever been thinking about something, and that leads you to think about something else, and then something else, and something else, and then you realize you're miles away from where you started, but you're not going to be able to solve that problem until you figure out this thing. So, and every rational thought processes are often very different from each other. If two highly rational people are both thinking about the same thing, they could go in completely opposite directions. Because there's no standard methodology for thinking about something. The basic method of thinking about something is to think, try to think something up and then see if that works. And if it doesn't work, think of something else and keep going until you come to some kind of answer, if you can. Try to come to some kind of answer that stands up to criticism. And we learn logic so that we can recognize, one of the reasons we learn logic is so we can recognize flaws in our own thinking, and we come up with ideas. And that's one of the curious things about logic, is that when you learn logic, when you learn rational thinking, how to think properly, you tend to be less sure of yourself. You tend to be more aware that you can be wrong, more aware of it, more likely to detect yourself as being wrong or to be unsure of things. So you'd be much less likely to make definite statements. Although when you do make a definite statement, you're more likely to be right than someone who hasn't studied logic. Does that make sense? Logic tends to make us less confident about what we believe, less sure of what we believe, but it also tends to make us more comfortable with uncertainty. There's lots of stuff I don't know, and I'm very comfortable with that. And I run into people who hate when they don't know something. It's like, dude, there's so much, you're not going to learn everything. A lot of it's hard. So, think something up, and I lift something out. It's how about. So what Socrates is basically doing here is saying, well, look, here's an idea. What if we say knowledge equals true opinion plus rational explanation? Do we think that works? Rational explanation to true opinion. Now, two things you do when you work on something. You think about evidence and think about terms. You heard that phrase, define your terms? Well, sometimes defining a term can be a very difficult thing, and it can take a long time. And actually, an acceptable philosophy paper could be that to just set out to try and define a particular term. In fact, there's a couple of paper options like that. What is happiness / what is success? Because I think ultimately they could be considered the same thing. What is beauty? What makes something beautiful? What is value? What is the real meaning of the term value in practical terms out there in the world? And remember, if I'm asking a philosophical question, I'm not asking you to take an opinion survey. I'm not asking you to go out and find out what most people think the word beauty means. So if you go out and ask a dozen different people what they think beauty is, and you bring in the answers, I would say, why did you do this? I asked you to figure out what beauty is. And you'd have to go and do different things to figure out what beauty is. You'd have to see how people react to stuff that's called beauty, what kinds of things they actually call beautiful. and whether their actions, their behavior, fits with what they believe. Because for many, many people, the kind of behavior they think they do, the things they think they do, are very different from things that they don't do. Have you ever noticed someone who's angry all the time but insists that he never loses his temper? I knew a woman once who would loudly insist, I don't play games. I never played games. And a boyfriend told me she was the biggest game player he had ever known. So,
when you refer to evidence in this case, are we talking scientific evidence?
What is scientific evidence as opposed to other kinds of evidence?
I'm
Aha!
asking you.
No, you asked me, do I mean scientific evidence? And you don't know what scientific means, so you asked me a question that's like, do you mean Moogie Pop evidence? Because you used a word you don't understand. Do you see that? Do you see that? Sometimes we ask questions using words we don't understand. Better way to say is, what do I mean by evidence? Right? And then I can start talking about science, or I could talk about the evidence, and you're going to kick yourselves for this. Evidence is that which is evident. Right? What is evident in this room? Right? If someone asks you, is there a video camera in this room? What's the evidence?
Yes.
You see something that looks like a video camera, right? Right. Now, it's really important to distinguish experience from belief from theory. You are having an experience of seeing something that looks like other things that you have seen that were called video cameras, right? You have an experience with someone holds up the arm, which, here's a video camera. You look at it, okay, what makes it a video camera? Well, it records video and da-da-da, so you're familiar with the objects, and you see one that looks like it. And you can see that I'm treating it like a video camera, because I'm going from one side of the shot to the other side. Right, so, right, I'm behaving like it's a video camera. That's the evidence. What would be the theory? The theory would be, well, it is a video camera. There actually is a video camera here. You say, based on what I can see, there's a video camera here. Is there... yes?
What if it's not... If it's about something that you actually can't see? What if it's something like happiness or something? What would be a good example?
I can't see happiness?
Well,
I see happiness and
like
misery almost every day. Every time I look at people. If you go out to, if you go out to the beach or I was at the Toshiba Tall Ships Festival this weekend, and I've almost recovered. We put up a pirate encampment, a huge pirate encampment this time. We put on a play, what I wrote, well, I wrote half of it, and I directed it and everything like that. And I got up and was excited, and afterwards it went pretty well. And so afterwards I had this feeling that on previous occasions has been described as happiness. So you can't tell me you don't experience. You're telling me you've never been happy? Seriously, that. Have you never been happy?
I have.
Yeah, you have been happy. So there's some evidence. Have you seen other people who appeared to be happy?
Yes.
There's more evidence. Then you can think about under what circumstances were they happy? What was it like for them to be happy? What is it like for you to be happy? How is that different from other states? And what kinds of things go into making you happy? I mean, I used to have there was a period in my life where I was pretty miserable all the time. And now I'm in a period of time where I'm happy most of the time. Right? And so I can look at that and say, well, what are the things that contributed to this? Right? And what things did I do that contribute to this? What things did other people do? And how did I get these other people to do them? What did I do to make myself in a position of happiness? And then I can say, well, what are the manifestations of happiness? What is the most preferable state to be in? Do I want to be excited all the time and raving? Or do I want to have calm periods or periods where I get to talk and jump up and down and pontificate about happiness? Right, and after a while, if you get to know me, you'll have a pretty clear idea of what makes me happy. Right, dressing up like a pirate, pretty good. Drinking good alcohol, yeah. Hanging out with my daughter, hanging out with my friends, hanging out with my girlfriend, yeah. Sports, Budweiser. Right. So this is something that can be studied, and that's really what philosophy is about, is actually looking at stuff rather than sort of having abstract ideas of it. And in bad philosophy or bad academic writing, people completely ignore evidence and write as though there's no such thing as evidence, that science doesn't exist. I'll tell you the difference between regular evidence and scientific evidence. The difference isn't in the evidence. Everything anybody could ever experience is evidence. Could be evidence, it could be scientific evidence, or evidence of any kind. What makes something scientific evidence is simply that it's been studied closely and systematically. When you actually watch people doing stuff and make careful records of what they do, or careful measurements of things, that's what creates scientific evidence. It's careful observations. And someone becomes a scientist when they make careful observations or think clearly about the implications of the evidence. One of the greatest scientific teams in history was Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler. They didn't work together very well, but they gave us the modern model of the solar system. They were the team that gave us elliptical orbits and a very careful understanding of how the solar system moved. And it was based on their data that Isaac Newton figured out the law of universal gravitation. And they're interesting because Brahe made the best scientific astronomical instruments that had been seen in the world up until that time. Right? And he made evidence collection very, very, well, I won't say easy, but he made it precise evidence collection possible. He created the means to create really, really detailed and precise measurements of observations of things seen in the solar system. Without a telescope. He did not have a telescope. He invented about a dozen different astronomical instruments to observe certain things about the heavens. But I don't believe he ever owned a telescope. Kepler was the guy who sat down with his data, particularly the Mars data, the data on the orbit of Mars, of the behavior of Mars in the sky, how Mars moved relative to the fixed stars. And Kepler took that, and that information was so detailed, he was able to detect a really slight bulge in Mars's orbit. Because Mars's orbit, to most of us, we'd call it a circle. But it's actually an ellipse. It's a little squished, one says. It gets a little bit closer and further away to the sun over the course of the Martian year. And Kepler was the guy who figured that out. So there's the thing about evidence. Anything that can be observed, can be reliably, repeatedly observed, is evidence. And we talk about science simply because scientists are very, very careful and are good at math. They're good at figuring stuff out. Yes?
I have a question. This is how my mind goes. Is happiness a state of being, and our actions are just a result of a state that we can't see? That's where I was going with that. Is that a good argument?
I think the people's actions, well, it's not a real argument because it doesn't say, happiness is a state of being. Well, my hat has a state of being. You know, it's on my head, right? And it's dusty.
But it's tangible.
But you didn't say anything about tangible. You talked about being, right? You would have to say that's something related to happiness, but you have to say what happiness actually is. How is because all our states of being, how we are. First, define a state of being. Is it our emotional balance, the chemical balance in our bloodstreams, states of neural firing, our synaptic loadings, the propensities to fire or not fire, our axonic, our neuronic programming, the way each of our neurons is programmed. Right? But how is that different from sadness or anger? And yeah, sure, how we feel very strongly determines how we act, how we react to something. You know, someone comes up and makes a joke about you. If you're happy, you'll probably laugh at it. If you're not happy, you probably get angry. Right? So sure, but that seems to be more that psychology, which is related, but then you have to go deeper. Right? So it's a start. Right? So you think about evidence, and you think about terms to say we know something, right? Right? So two ways to think about something. You've got this claim. You've got this claim about knowledge, which Socrates isn't really making, he's entertaining. There's a phrase here, to entertain an idea. So this is I'll call it an idea. Claim is not a good word. So it's an idea, not a claim. Socrates has this idea, and he's like, hey, maybe it's this. And that's okay, let's think about it. Do we have evidence to support this? And what do the terms really mean? And that's another thing. Remember you said, what about what's scientific evidence? And I said, what's scientific? You said, I don't know. Right? So that's something that can be studied. In fact, I guess I could make that I should make that an essay topic. What is science? Then I'd have to write a prompt, and that would involve work. So there's always a downside. But hey, if anyone's interested in the topic of what is science, send me an email. Maybe it's already in there. I just haven't written it properly. You can send me an email. What is science? You have to say it like this. Science! Okay, was there a question? Did somebody say something? Or did I tread on somebody's joke? Because I'm not the only one who gets to make jokes here. That wouldn't be fair. So you think about this, and what Socrates does here, right? You can't think of everything all at once. He starts out by thinking of what's rational explanation. Right? Right. So if you guys can remember, the idea we're looking at is knowledge equals true opinion plus rational explanation. I'll put it up here. K equals TO plus RE. All right, so can you remember that means knowledge equals true opinion plus rational explanation with a question mark. Because it's like, well, we're thinking about this. We're entertaining this idea. So, right, Socrates could go a number of ways here. He could say, well, what's true opinion? He could say, do we have evidence for this? But, the evidence question usually should come after the conceptual question. You know why? Because you don't know what it means, you don't know what evidence to look for. Right? So, well, if we know what true opinion and rational explanation are, then we might want to go and look for evidence. I'm not really sure what kind of evidence we would look at this point in time. And you know, if you want to make my life a little bit harder, you could remember the question, the evidence question in the second half of this lecture, and say, but Dr. Young, you've said this. Do you have evidence for that? And you might see me tap dancing. I don't know. Right. So, next step. What's rational explanation? So this is called narrowing down a topic. And if you write on the top, by the way, if you were to write on the topic, what is knowledge, and then you start saying, well, maybe it's this. You just say maybe. You don't have to make a claim. You can say, okay, what's a rational explanation? And you could write a whole paper. You could write a long paper just on the topic of what is a rational explanation. And that's one way of looking at this, is to say this is Socrates' Odyssey, first stage Odyssey paper on rational explanation. He's thinking this over and reporting his thinking process. And so they have a number of goes at it. They try a couple of different ways. Try number one. Making one's thought clear through speech by means of verbs and nouns. Imaging the opinion in the stream that flows through the lips. Did anyone figure out what that meant? It wasn't highly
Talking?
Talking, yeah. Or painting a word picture, right? If you're explaining something to someone, sometimes you have to talk about events, and you can make them very vivid with the way you describe them, your choice of words and stuff. You can communicate. So, making one's thought clear through speech. So here, rational explanation is thought possibly a set of words, right? A set of words that accomplishes a certain thing. That, right? I'm up here lecturing. All my lectures is words, right? And I explain a bunch of ideas, like the idea of writing a paper that demonstrates a thought process. Then there's the idea of a thought process. And I talk about a thought process, right? So can you imagine me coming up here and saying, this is a thought process, and then I give a string of words, I say a bunch of stuff, and at the end of it you go, oh yeah, I know what a thought process is now. Have you ever had that? You know, someone, like a term you've never heard before, or a term that you've heard a lot and don't really understand, and you talk to someone and they explain it, they give an explanation, they make it clear, and afterwards you say, okay, I know what this is now. Right? So that's the first try at figuring out what rational explanation is. Not talking about true opinion, and we're not talking about whether we have evidence that this is true or false, that, you know, knowledge is. We're not talking about evidence yet, and we're not talking about true opinion. We're talking about an explanation, a set of words. So, does that work?
No.
No. Well, it's a thing that Socrates says, well, it's a thing that anyone could do, anyone can do sooner or later. He can show what he thinks about anything. So all have any right opinion will be found to have it with the additional of rational explanation. And there will be henceforth no possibility of right opinion without knowledge. Okay. So, here's the comment. Now, not necessarily a criticism. This is sort of tracing out the implications of the idea. And this is one of the things about philosophy, is that it takes a long time to figure out whether an idea is right or wrong. And part of the work you do with that idea is figuring out its implications. What does it imply about the world? What does it say? And here Socrates is claiming anyone who has a right opinion, a true opinion, right, will be found to have it with the addition of rational explanation. What that means is, if you have a right opinion, you will also have the explanation, the rational explanation. I'm going to change that to true. If you have a true opinion, so if you have the TO, you will eventually also have the rational explanation. Well, why is this? Well, if you have an idea, Socrates is saying, look, you have an idea, you'll eventually, it's inevitable that you will be able to explain your idea. You'll be able to say what your idea is. And at this point, I think, I'm going to introduce philosophical Mr. Ed, based on the Mr. Ed from the, I can't remember the name of the Mr. Ed show.
The horse.
Yeah, the horse. No, but the philosophical Mr. Ed may or may not be a horse. The original Mr. Ed, yes, is a horse. Absolutely. Mr. Ed was a horse by fiat, because you were told Mr. Ed's a horse. Right, so it's fiction. This thing is there, and they said, in this show, this is a horse. Just like in the show Third Rock from the Sun, John Lithgow was an alien. Look, here's John Lithgow, he's an alien. Right. Or John Lithgow's character, I don't remember what he's called. But the High Commander, he's an alien, played by John Lithgow. So, Mr. Ed was a horse, played by another horse, possibly also named Mr. Ed. In the show Briscoe County, The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr., Comet the Wonder Horse was actually played by 3 different horses. And I believe Rin Tin Tin was played by a badger. I'm hazy on some of these details. Right, so philosophical Mr. Ed. The philosophical Mr. Ed. Am I in shot? I'm in shot. All right. Philosophical Mr. Ed has hooves. Oh no. Let's be. It has closed hooves. 4 legs, hairy mane and tail, right, the long hairy bits, long face, don't know why,
Ears.
say again?
Ears.
Ears. 2?
Excuse me.
That's right, it's 2 ears. You hear I say 2?
Yeah.
2 ears, chompy teeth. And everything else we think horses. Now, I have some of the things horses have. I have hair, I have 4 limbs, I have eyes, 2, just like horses. I have nostrils, I have a mouth, I have teeth, well, some teeth. Right, but I don't have everything horses have. Right. Okay. So, right, so there's an inadequate justification for calling me a horse. But Mr. Ed, the philosophical Mr. Ed, he has everything, but still, he is not he's not defined to be a horse. The definition of Mr. Ed does not say he's a horse. You can think of Mr. Ed, philosophical Ed, we should call him P. Ed, as a horse. If you like that, that's fine with me. And if it becomes important to keep the distinction, I'll bring it up later. But, okay, philosophical Mr. Ed, or P.M. Ed. PME? I'll just go PME. Philosophical Mr. Ed. Right. So, and I just named him philosophical Mr. Ed. All right. So, right. So, explanation, the idea one has. So, if I have a true opinion, okay, is it here? So if I'm going to have a true opinion of Mr. Ed being a horse, what does it take for that to be a true opinion? Right, this first part is, A, I think Mr. Ed is a horse. Right, so we're going to say, for the moment, that I have a true opinion of Mr. Ed, and that opinion is Mr. Ed is a horse. So this is one way I can have a true opinion of Mr. Ed. Mr. Ed, I think Mr. Ed is a horse. But what else has to be there for this opinion to be true?
Rational explanation.
No, for it to be true, not for it to be knowledge. It's very simple.
Logic?
Evidence?
Logic has to be there, but logic is everywhere.
Rational explanation.
But we're trying to think about what is a rational explanation. So a rational explanation is a true opinion plus rational explanation. It's not going to work. Now, what do I have to put here?
A visual image,
I'll put, so again?
a visual image. You want to be able to see it and then be able to, no.
You guys are
That would be evidence.
overthinking this.
That
What?
would be That would be evidence.
Yeah, that would be evidence. But you guys are overthinking it.
Okay,
What
somebody
is-
else must agree with you.
Nope. I know lots of people who agree. Well, I know lots of people who agree with each other about things that are just amazingly not true. Have you never watched Fox News Channel? I mean, seriously. I mean, the regular news programs on Fox News Channel, they're just like any other news programs. But the commentaries, Fox and Friends, and they're imbeciles.
Justification, belief.
This is B. This is B. It must be say that I think Mr. Ed is a horse, and what? Say if I think Mr. Ed is a horse, what else has to be in place? What else has to be the case?
Is a belief.
I already believe he's a horse, right? Thinking something and believing it are the same thing. Have you ever known someone to think something and not to believe it? I think that we should nuke Syria, and I don't believe that we should nuke Syria. Never happened? You have. I'll start. We could play hangman. Okay, I don't know if you can make that out. Or like Jeopardy.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, it can be repeatedly observed.
It's,
Is that right?
no.
I'm trying.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good. But I want to ask you if here's my opinion. Right? What makes, if you have an opinion, what makes an opinion a true end? And I've got like 1 2-letter word, another 2-letter word, another 2-letter word, a single-letter word, and a 5-letter word. Yes?
Didn't you say you need evidence, so you're getting the evidence from the root in the book?
Well, you can put out evidence, right? But, yes.
E?
That's Wheel of Fortune.
I didn't know
man.
at all.
Is Mr.
Yep.
Ed
You
is
did
a
buy
horse?
it.
Mr. Ed is a horse! Yay! In order for my opinion to be true, it has to be a true opinion. It has to be true as well as being an opinion. It's 2 words! See what I said about overthinking? It's just right to it. That's exactly right. Right. I have to believe Mr. Ed is a horse. What's another way to make for me to have a true opinion about Mr. Ed? Well, if I believe Mr. Ed, who is exactly as specified here, if I believe Mr. Ed is a horse, if I believe Mr. Ed is a badger, and Mr. Ed is a badger, then I have a true opinion of Mr. Ed. Yes?
Does it have to also be rational the way you explain it?
That's in this bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so see, I was talking about, say I have a true opinion. Right. The true opinion part is not the rational explanation part. That's the different part. And you say, well, it has to be rational. And I say, well, okay, if you explain what you mean by rational, I'll try and apply your definition of rational to this. But right here, we're trying to figure out whether this is a good definition of rational explanation. That's the question. Is this a good definition of rational explanation? And actually, what I'm leading up to is trying to explain Socrates' reason for saying that it's not. Right? So, Socrates says, I don't quite want. Soc's comment is, if you have a true opinion, you will eventually also have the rational explanation. So say I have a true explanation of Mr. Ed. A set of words that fully and accurately describes the idea. See the thing there? The idea. I've got an idea. What is my idea? My idea is Mr. Ed is a horse. Right? And we're saying it's a true opinion at this point. Maybe the term true opinion doesn't make sense. Maybe it does. But here's a definition of true opinion that I kind of think fits like the words true and opinion. So, say I have a true opinion of Mr. Ed, and my opinion is I think Mr. Ed is a horse. Alright, what am I is there any condition under which I won't be able to explain this idea I have in my head, right? I have this true opinion, which is an idea in my head. When will I not be able to explain it? Will I not be able to explain it and describe the idea? I don't know any conditions where I won't be able to figure it out, unless I'm deaf or mute, or a Fox commentator. That I just, but, you know, here's what you do. You know, ask me, what are my ideas about, my computer is dying.
Right.
Does anybody have this stuff printed out?
Which one?
The dialogue, the Theaetetus? Thank you. Because I'm going to be jumping on this in a minute.
I was actually trying to read through it.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
So, go ahead, yeah.
Right. Let me go to sleep now. Right. Right. Making one's thought true through... Right. What we're talking about here for the rational explanation is just explaining what one thinks. So, we assume that this is, we're assuming that I have a true opinion. So we determine there's an if there, right? We're just assuming it. What am I going to say? Well, if any idea, you know, I take my idea of a horse and I explain it to you. So I'm going to say, I believe that Mr. Ed is a horse, right? And it's true that Mr. Ed is a horse, okay? And here's the rational explanation. I think Mr. Ed is a horse, and by horse, I mean a quadruped, domesticable quadruped with, you know, you can ride or have pull carriages, or that eats apples or sugar cubes and will bite your fingers off if you if you don't hold your hand flat. Things like that. So I give you my idea of what a horse is, and I say I believe that Ed is this kind of thing. And well, how is that different from true opinion? In fact, how is that different from opinion? How is knowledge different from opinion in that case? I explain what I believe. Have I added anything to my opinion? Right. So if we put out that formula again, knowledge equals true opinion plus rational explanation. What do I write here? What do I write in this thing? We're going to say what rational explanation is. Well, giving a set of words that fully and accurately describes the idea one has.
You need the description there.
Yeah, description of my opinion. So, me giving, right? uttering a set of words that fully and accurately describes the idea that one has, right? That's the idea of what a rational explanation is. But then, if it's that, it's me saying my opinion out loud. And that's all it is. So, suppose I'm walking along the street and I see an object in the field that in all respects resembles a horse, right? Mr. Ed is such an object. I see Mr. Ed. Mr. Ed is an object that in all respects resembles a horse. Right? At that point, according to the definition, because I haven't said anything, do I know that that's a horse?
Not exactly, because
Well, I have not, according to this section, I haven't said my opinion out loud. I haven't described my opinion, right? Have you ever had, you know, like, imagine that you see an object that you think is a horse, and someone asks you, what is that object? And you say it's a horse, and they say, okay, and then you walk away, right? And you don't think about it any more than that. You just have the word horse in that object. Mr. Ed is a horse. You got that in your mind. But you're not thinking about anything else. And then your friend says, oh, wait a moment. You know what? I don't know what a horse is. What's a horse? And then you explain all your ideas about a horse. And then, if this is correct, right, if this is what rational explanation means, then you know what a horse, that Mr. Ed is a horse. Now, your opinion of that object, assuming it's true, right? We're just going to just assume that Mr. Ed is a horse, so your opinion is true. So at that point, you have this, you think out all of what you think about a horse, and suddenly you know Mr. Ed's a horse, where before you just had the true opinion. So you just had true opinion, true opinion, true opinion. You think about what you think, you explain it, or you come up in your head with a set of words. And only at that point you know it. Isn't that weird? Does that fit with our experience of knowing stuff? Wouldn't we rather say that you knew it was a horse when you looked at it and you said, assuming that it is a horse, you look at the object and assume it is a horse and say, hey, that's a horse. Wouldn't you say, I knew it back then? What if your friend says, well, you didn't know that before, did you? You didn't say we saw this object yesterday, and the friend says, well, you didn't know that it was a horse yesterday because I actually had a brain monitor on you and you never articulated the idea, so you didn't know it.
there was some memory because he was able to, like when he was talking to his social characteristics, and he was able to then the next day say, well, I remember these things about you, so now that I know that's you.
Yeah, right. So, but he didn't know it before. Didn't know it yesterday. Does this make any sense? Does this fit with this? It's like, yeah, no, it doesn't fit at all. My experience of knowing stuff is I know it before I articulate it. Because, you know, I actually work with a horse. My girlfriend has a horse. I'll go there, or sometimes I'll turn the horse out. And I don't think about what's a horse while I'm doing it. It's just, there's the horse. Right? And every so often we come across other animals, other objects, because it's in a big stables. And, right? Oh, look, there's a new horse. Well, do I have to explain what a horse is so I know it's a horse? It's just I recognize, right, yes, there was a
My question was, and I guess it goes back to what true opinion. Why just not say opinion instead of true opinion? Because that becomes subjective, correct?
All right, well, I'm going to give you one answer now and another one after the break. The answer I give you now is, suppose I look at this Mr. Ed and think, aha, that's a combine harvester. You ever seen one of those, the big things that go through the fields? And they, you know, they They thresh, they take the wheat, they separate it from the stalks, they bale the straw and push it out. Right. And I look at this object, it's going, and the thing is clomping around on these hooves, and it's going, you know, and doing all the horrible smelly things that horses do. You know. And I say, that's a combine harvester. And then I explain what I think. Well, it's a combine harvester because it threshes grain. And it threshes grain and bales straw and bundles things up. And you look at it and you say, it doesn't do any of those things. So opinion plus this word, rational explanation number 1, right, RE1, can't make knowledge. Right? That can't be it. Rational explanation is not it. And I think this is basically what Socrates is saying in this part is, if you say that rational explanation is just giving an explanation, then you're going to be wrong. Okay, let's take a break until 8:15. Can we manage that? 8:15 by that clock there.